What actually is social practice theory?
So, social practice theory is a response in the field of sociology to understand social action, not in terms of micro-social phenomena, and not in terms of macro-social phenomena, but to look at but to change the unit of analysis away from, say, individual behaviour, and a focus on rational decision making and autonomy at the micro level, and to move away from structural macroeconomic phenomena at that high level, and to change the unit of inquiry so that you're looking at social practices and how social practices change over time, which incorporates understandings of the micro and the macro together by looking at social practices.
Thank you. So can you give me an example of what a social practice might be?
Yes, so one practice that's used quite regularly as an example, has been used by Elizabeth Shove, is the practice of showering. So you might want to ask, why is it that we've had such a shift in the last century from, say, bathing, and that now to showering, where now, which showering obviously takes a lot more water and a lot more heat and electricity and is much more unsustainable. So how can you track that progression? Now you might explain that you might like to do a social analysis of a kind of micro or situated analysis of, okay, why is it that people now want to shower more? And you might analyse it from that perspective. You might also do it from a kind of like macro structural perspective about changes or the expansion of capitalism into the home, providing new commodities for people to want to buy. You could also look at it in terms of social practices. So you could change the unit of inquiry. So rather than asking about like what are the motivations for people, what are people's motivations for doing it, or asking about, okay, what is the kind of like, how is the change in processes of production of goods or something like that, how has that changed? Rather than looking at one of these two levels, you can incorporate both those by looking at the social practice of showering and ask, how is it that showering has become a practice, or how has it taken over bathing as a practice? So you could look at the shifting materials, the shifting meanings, and the shifting skills and competences.
So how do you feel that this might be relevant to disabled people? How would social practices and understanding social practices help us to understand the issues that disabled people face?
So social practice theory can help in terms of reframing the question and debates. So for social practice theory, rather than focus on the individual, focusing on their motivations and desires or their capacities, what does it reframes the question in terms of the social practice itself? And it asks, rather than asking how do people do a practice, it asks how is it that people become carriers of a social practice, or how does a social practice recruit people? What populations does social practices recruit from? So a good but also a bit of a strange example is like for yoga, social practice of yoga, you might say that actually social practice theory doesn't recruits from fit and flexible bodies. Actually it doesn't, it recruits a lot from the elderly. But you can start to see how certain practices require or need certain kinds of materials, they require certain kinds of meanings and certain kinds of competencies from people to be able to recruit from them. So what you can do is if a certain practice only recruits from a particular population and excludes other populations, what you can do is look to try to shift the shared materials, meanings and competencies of a practice so that it could recruit from other groups as well.
Thank you.